My wife had a long affair with my friend, and I caught them red-handed by printing out their secret messages. So my wife, 26 years old, let's call her Mia, cheated on me, a 27-year-old, with my 27-year-old friend, who we'll name Jack for simplicity. Here's a little backstory. We met when I was 22 at a mutual friend's wedding. Mia was a good friend of the bride, and I was on the groom's side. They sat us at the same table to get acquainted. When I first laid eyes on her, I was stunned by her beauty. As we got to talking, we found we had a lot in common and clicked immediately. We chatted for hours at the table, then hit the dance floor. We danced and drank the whole night, eventually kissing right there in the middle of the dance floor. When we pulled away, our friends, the bride and groom, came over and asked what was happening between us. They were thrilled, playing the part of matchmakers. We just brushed them off and carried on with our night. We left without exchanging numbers, but about a week later, I got a text from her asking if I wanted to meet up. The bride had given her my number. Of course, I said yes, and that led to us dating. Our relationship was amazing. Aside from a few minor arguments, we never really fought. About 2 years in, I proposed, and less than a year later, we got married. We had been married for just over a year when things started to fall apart. Shortly before our first anniversary, small things began to irritate me. Mia became more secretive with her phone. Girls' nights out became more frequent, and our love life practically disappeared. I brought it up a few times, but she always brushed it off, saying I was just being insecure. She acted as if my feelings and attempts to communicate meant nothing to her. I grew colder and colder. I stopped kissing her goodbye when I left for work, and unless there was something important to discuss, we barely talked. One night, while Mia was asleep, I took her phone and laptop, going through her messages, emails, and social media, but found nothing. After reading stories online about cheating, I decided to check her car. I grabbed her keys and found a second phone inside. I knew right away what was happening, but I wanted to gather all the evidence before confronting her. I didn't want her to say it was just one time or come up with another excuse. I scrolled through the phone, and there was only one contact saved. I read through all the messages, connected the phone to my computer, printed every text and photo, and spent the night researching divorce lawyers. I spent hours picking out a lawyer and found one I liked. I emailed him, but since it was Saturday, he was out of the office. Then I decided I needed to know who her lover was. I grabbed my phone, entered the number, and was about to call, pretending to be a Spectrum internet provider rep, because who doesn't use them? But instead, Jack's contact popped up. It took me a minute to put two and two together, but when I did, I exploded. I yelled and cursed in my office. Mia opened the door to check on me, but when I saw her, I told her to get the hell out. She closed the door and went to our room. I had never yelled at my wife before or even raised my voice. I spent the entire day in my office, silently boiling with rage, staring at the wall. I called one of my friends, the groom from that wedding where I met Mia, and told him I needed a drink. I asked if he'd join me. He must have sensed something in my voice because he asked if I was okay. I told him no, and I really needed that drink. Without saying much, I grabbed all the printouts and drove to the bar. I got there first, ordered 4 shots and a beer. I was on my last shot when my friend, let's call him Ted, showed up and asked what was going on. I told him straight out Mia was cheating on me. He sympathized and asked if I wanted to know with who. I told him it was Jack. He got noticeably angry, given that he was the one who introduced me to Jack. All he could say was, "I'm sorry," over and over again. Jack and I were never particularly close. We never made plans to hang out one-on-one. Ted offered to tell his wife and cover for me if she asked what was wrong, blaming it on work issues. I agreed. We drank and talked for hours. Later, I called a cab and headed home around 3 a.m. It was the first time I checked my phone since calling Ted. I had a missed call and a bunch of messages, all from Mia. She was asking where I was, when I'd be home, and if I was okay. When I got home, she was asleep on the couch. I just went upstairs and passed out in our bed. In the morning, she was already in bed with me when I woke up. I got dressed and left the house, drove to the office, and buried myself in work all day. I came home around 10 p.m., and to my surprise, Mia greeted me. She said she made dinner and asked if I wanted it heated up. I said no and went straight to bed. She followed me shortly after, asking what was wrong. I told her to leave me alone because I wanted to sleep. She kept pestering me until I finally snapped and yelled, "Mia, stop. I'm trying to sleep. Go away." The next morning, I received an email from the lawyer requesting a meeting later that day. I confirmed the appointment and began getting ready for work. When I came downstairs, Mia had made breakfast, making yet another attempt to talk. I helped myself to a small portion and sat down. She started by pointing out how differently I had been acting lately. Her words gradually shifted, focusing on how much I had changed and her desire to understand why. I told her that work had been stressful and that things would settle down soon. I finished eating, told her I needed to leave, and headed to the office. I counted down the hours until the meeting with the lawyer. Before leaving, I told my assistant I'd be stepping out for lunch with a client, something I said often since Mia occasionally called my office. The meeting with the lawyer went smoothly. I handed over all the evidence I had collected, and he reviewed it carefully. He expressed sympathy, but noted that it was good I had gathered such detailed information. He explained that since we lived in a fault-based divorce state, Mia wouldn't be able to claim much of my assets. I hadn't even considered the financial aspect. I just wanted the marriage to end as quickly as possible. The lawyer asked to keep the evidence, but I insisted on him making copies instead. I hadn't confronted Mia yet, and I wasn't ready to listen to whatever excuses she might come up with. He agreed, instructing his assistant to make duplicates. I asked when Mia would be served, and he estimated it would take about 2 weeks. I thanked him and left. I went home that evening intending to confront Mia, but the house was empty. I called her once, no answer. I called again, still nothing. Finally, I sent her a text. I didn't hold back. I told her that even if she was rolling around with Jack at that very moment, she needed to come home because we needed to talk. Predictably, she called me back within a minute, demanding to know what I meant. I kept my response short and told her to come home immediately. 15 minutes later, she pulled into the driveway. As she walked inside, I remarked how convenient it was that 15 minutes was just about the distance from our house to Jack's. Her expression froze as she processed what I was implying. I let her stand there for a moment, but she said nothing. I pressed her, asking if she had anything to say. She scrambled to deny everything, her explanations growing increasingly frantic and aggressive. Eventually, she resorted to insults, trying to flip the blame onto me. I slammed my fist onto the table, cutting her off mid-sentence. From the drawer, I pulled out the stack of evidence and laid it in front of her. I didn't say much at first, just told her to take a good look at the pile of proof I had gathered. One by one, I began flipping through each page. As the reality of the situation sank in, she broke down crying, begging me to stop. She apologized over and over, saying she loved me and pleading for forgiveness. I met her desperate eyes and asked her where all that confidence had gone. The same confidence she had when she was lashing out at me just moments earlier. She tried to reach for me, apologizing as she leaned in. I pushed her away with my hand, keeping my distance. She offered to go upstairs, suggesting we could fix things physically. I held her gaze and made it clear there was no fixing anything. I told her I would never touch her again. Then I calmly mentioned that my lawyer also had copies of the messages and photos. I told her I was filing for divorce and instructed her to grab a bag, pack her things, and get out of my house. The next morning, I woke up with a clear mind and decided it was time to start putting my life back together. I scheduled a doctor's appointment for a full STD panel, just to be safe. Later that day, I reached out to the people who mattered, my father and a few close friends. They were supportive, offering advice, and checking in to see if I needed anything. I reassured them that I had it under control. I also decided to reach out to Mia's parents. I sent them a message thanking them for welcoming me into their family and expressing gratitude for everything they had done for me. I explained that Mia and I were divorcing and that despite everything, I would miss them. Mia's parents were kind people, but to be honest, they were also a bit overbearing. I wasn't exactly heartbroken about cutting ties with them. Still, I ended the message by telling them they were welcome to ask me any questions if they wanted. I didn't hear back for a while, so I shifted my focus to Mia's sister. That was a tougher pill to swallow. Mia's sister and I had grown close over the years, We were more like friends than in-laws. I knew this whole mess was about to ruin that relationship too. I decided to send her a message. I kept it simple. Hey, I hate to be the one to break this, but Mia and I are getting a divorce. I just wanted you to hear it from me. Thank you for treating me like family from day one. If you ever need anything, I'm here. Right around the time I hit send, Mia's parents finally responded. The conversation was predictable, but unpleasant. They said they were sorry to hear about the divorce and asked why Mia hadn't mentioned anything to them. I told them straight. I had found proof that Mia had been cheating on me for at least a year. I suspected it may have even started before our wedding. I added that I didn't know why she hadn't told them, but suggested they give her a call. I mentioned she had left the house, and I assumed she went to them. Their response was immediate confusion. They hadn't heard from her at all. They promised to reach out to her and thank me for being honest. Then came the inevitable question. Was I absolutely sure she had been having an affair? I didn't mince words. I told them I had seen the messages and the photos. I assured them there was no doubt. They apologized again, clearly disappointed in Mia, and said they would try to contact her. Once I was done with her family, I turned my attention to Jack's fiancée. I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but Jack was engaged. I thought the confrontation would be tricky, that maybe Mia and Jack had already concocted some elaborate cover story. But either they hadn't talked, or they were just plain careless. I sent her a message around 2 p.m., asking if she had time to meet for coffee. By 2:05, she had replied, suggesting a trendy little cafe near her office. She wanted to meet at 2:30. I arrived early, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window, waiting. She showed up a few minutes later, grabbed her drink, and joined me at the table. I didn't dance around the issue. I told her flat out, Jack had been cheating on her with Mia for over a year. She froze for a second, obviously stunned, and I explained that I had only discovered the affair a few days earlier. I admitted I should have told her sooner, but needed to get my divorce rolling and sort through my own misery first. She asked how I found out, and I walked her through everything, right down to the second phone and the messages. I even brought the folder with me, just in case she wanted to see it. When I placed the folder on the table and slid it over, she quietly flipped through the pages, scanning the messages and photos. Tears welled up, and she started crying without saying a word. I let her keep the folder. As much as I'd love to say I felt righteous or vindicated, I didn't. There was no sense of satisfaction, just exhaustion. This wasn't one of those victorious moments where you walk away feeling like you've won something. The whole thing just felt heavy. I spent the next week sitting in my backyard, chain smoking, and drinking more than I care to admit. I blasted music loud enough for the neighbors to hate me, but I didn't care. That was my week to wallow in self-pity. I told myself that once the week was over, I'd stop feeling sorry for myself and start getting my life back together. On a more positive note, I had already packed most of Mia's belongings, clothes, jewelry, and the rest. I even boxed up our wedding album and every photo that had her in it. When she came to pick up her stuff, I didn't want her lingering longer than necessary. And no, in case you're wondering, I didn't damage her clothes or break anything. Aside from a few picture frames, everything remained intact. At this point, there wasn't much else happening. I had informed everyone who needed to know. The doctor's appointment was scheduled, my lawyer was hard at work, and 90% of Mia's things were boxed and ready to go. I honestly wasn't sure what else to do. If she didn't pull any stunts, this could turn out to be the smoothest divorce in history. Since my last update, I've been indulging in a whole lot of self-pity. Drinking became the theme of my week. I drank, then drank some more. This might be the first semi-sober moment I've had since everything came crashing down, and even now, I'm struggling to put my feelings into words. As I mentioned before, I had reached out to everyone, Mia's family, my friends, even Jack's fiancée. The only person I hadn't heard from was Mia's sister, Emma. She and I had always been close, which made her silence sting even more. The night I kept drinking, I passed out in a lawn chair in my backyard, surrounded by empty bottles and crushed beer cans. I woke up to the smell of breakfast cooking. For a split second, I panicked. My first thought was that Mia had come back, thinking pancakes could somehow fix this. I shot out of the chair, ready to blow up at her. But when I stumbled inside, I found Emma in the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, still half asleep, trying to shake off the irritation. When Emma saw me, She set the spatula down and walked straight over, pulling me into a hug. She didn't say much, just led me to the table and placed a plate of food in front of me. As I ate, she finally opened up. She apologized for not responding sooner and explained that when Mia showed up at her place, all she had said was that we were having problems and that things would smooth over in a few days. Emma told me that after she got my message about the divorce, she asked Mia why, if things were going to be fine, I was filing for divorce. Apparently, that question cracked Mia's defenses, and she ended up spilling the truth. I couldn't help but smirk. I told Emma that Mia probably hadn't told her everything, and I laid out the full story. Emma assured me she wasn't there to make excuses for her sister. She wasn't on some peace mission to convince me to forgive Mia. If anything, she wanted to support me through it. She told me that while she loved her sister, she considered me a friend too, and that she wasn't about to abandon me, especially when I had done nothing wrong. Hearing that hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so much time worrying that this whole mess would destroy my friendship with Emma. Knowing she had my back felt like lifting a weight off my chest. I stood up, walked around the table, and hugged her again. Emma ended up staying at my place for 2 days, crashing in the guest room. This morning, she left as I was packing up gear for a weekend trip to my cabin, the one I bought before I married Mia. Since it was mine outright, Mia had no claim to it. As I loaded up the car with hunting and fishing gear, Emma asked if she could tag along. As much as I appreciated the offer, I told her it was probably best if she visited her sister instead. I could tell she wasn't thrilled about it, but she nodded. Emma wasn't one to hold grudges, but she also wasn't the type to let things slide. If anyone could get through to Mia, it was her. Emma hugged me and drove off. I was genuinely grateful for her support. And before anyone jumps to conclusions, no, she's not in love with me. Emma's only 20, way too young for me. Our relationship is nothing more than a strong friendship. On another note, I went to the doctor and got tested. The results were due on Monday. I also kept in touch with Jack's fiancée a few times to check in on her. She told me she was holding up but felt lost and unsure of what to do. I told her if she ever wanted to meet up and talk, I'd be more than happy to listen. Well, good news, I bagged a deer. A big, healthy one. I got it on the first day, which left me plenty of time for fishing. I only caught 2 fish, but they were decent-sized. I cooked one for dinner and froze the other. The rest of the trip, I processed the deer and soaked up the peace and quiet. Aside from a couple of drinks in the evening, I stuck to my promise and stayed sober. That week of heavy drinking was behind me. Now for the latest updates. The doctor called clean bill of health. Not exactly surprising, considering Mia and I hadn't been close in months, but it's always better to be sure. I reached out to Jack's fiancée again, but didn't hear back for a while. When she finally responded, she told me she had moved in with her family. She didn't give too many details, but the fact that she was back home told me things weren't going well for her. At least she was safe and getting support. I let her know if she needed anything. I was just a call away. She asked to meet for coffee the next day, and of course I agreed. We met at the same little cafe, and we ended up talking for nearly 2 hours. Most of the conversation revolved around everything that had happened. Mia, Jack, the fallout. She wanted to know what I planned to do next. Was I divorcing Mia, or was there any chance I'd forgive her? I told her plainly, there was no going back. For me, cheating marked the end. The level of selfishness and disregard it took to carry on an affair for over a year said everything I needed to know about Mia. She clearly didn't value or respect me, and I couldn't imagine building a future with someone like that. Then I flipped the question. I asked what she planned to do. She hesitated, admitting she felt lost. Everything she thought was true had unraveled, and now she wasn't sure if she should move forward or give Jack another chance. I told her if she could find it in her heart to forgive someone after a year of betrayal, she was a better person than me. That's when she opened up about her family. They were urging her to forgive Jack and marry him anyway. I didn't hold back. I told her point blank. Just because her family wanted it didn't mean she had to agree. I reminded her that Jack had not only betrayed her, but disrespected the idea of marriage itself. He cheated on his fiancée with another man's wife. If that didn't scream unfit for marriage, I didn't know what did. I told her to trust her instincts. At the end of the day, it was her life, and no one else had the right to make decisions that would shape it. I also shared something personal. When I first discovered Mia's affair, part of me desperately wanted to convince myself to forgive her. I tried to find a way to let my heart trick my brain into staying. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't do it. I told her I had only confided in one person about it before, but the truth was, my mind was made up from the start. There was nothing anyone could have said to change my decision. I added that when she left to stay with her family, she probably already knew deep down what she wanted to do. But by inviting so many voices into her head, she had clouded her judgment with everyone else's opinions. I finished by saying that, in the end, the mind and heart will always try to deceive you, but instincts rarely lie. She just needed to listen to that voice inside her. Shortly after our coffee meeting, Jack's fiancée thanked me, and we went our separate ways. The next day, I received an email from my lawyer informing me that Mia had been served the divorce papers at her workplace. I thanked him for handling everything so quickly. Later that afternoon, Emma called. She told me Mia had been in her room all day, crying in bed. I explained that Mia had been served the papers, and reality was probably beginning to sink in. Emma shifted the conversation, asking how my trip to the cabin went and if I had managed to catch or hunt anything. I told her about the deer, the fishing, and how much I enjoyed the solitude. After the call, I mentally prepared myself. I cleaned up the house, expecting Mia to show up at any moment, possibly ready to cause a scene. I figured if she were going to lash out, it would happen now that she'd been formally served. I called one of my closest friends, letting him know the situation. He agreed to come over immediately if Mia appeared, just to have a witness in case things escalated. I sat waiting for Mia to show up and make a scene. There wasn't any concrete reason to believe she would, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't taking any chances. I double-checked the locks and ensured the security cameras were working inside and outside the house. I called my friend again, letting him know the papers had been served and asking him to be ready to come over if necessary. I wasn't about to land in jail over this woman. Turns out, I was right to be cautious. Mia showed up, pounding on the front door and screaming for me to let her in. I immediately called my friend and Emma, asking them to head over. Mia was practically trying to break the door down. She cursed my name, begged me to let her inside, and hurled every insult imaginable, questioning how I could be so heartless. Ironically, I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself the entire time. I kept wondering, why didn't she just use her key? As far as I knew, she still had one. When my friend finally arrived, Mia was still shouting outside. He stayed in his truck, recording the entire ordeal on his phone. But, and here's where things took a turn, his wife, who happened to be friends with Mia, had come along for the ride. Against his better judgment, she got out and approached Mia, trying to calm her down. Mia's response? She slapped her across the face, yelling at her to stay out of it. That was enough for my friend. He put his phone away, called the police, and continued recording from his truck. Mia didn't stop yelling until the officers arrived. When they got there, Mia immediately switched gears. She tried to paint herself as the victim. One officer approached her, while the other went to speak with my friend and his wife. Mia sobbed, telling the cop that I had hit her and thrown her out of the house. Fortunately, my friend and his wife backed me up, explaining that she had been screaming and banging on the door long before they arrived. There wasn't any evidence to support her claims. Eventually, the officer knocked on my door. As soon as I opened it, Mia went into full meltdown mode. She started screaming that I had assaulted her and demanded my arrest. The officer hesitated, but as he reached for his cuffs, I calmly asked if I could grab my phone to prove she was lying. He paused, giving me a chance to pull up footage from the security cameras. After watching the video, the officer sighed, apologized for the misunderstanding, and removed the cuffs. He admitted they had received 15 calls from my neighbors during the ordeal. Apparently, Mia had been shouting, "He hit me," loud enough for half the street to hear, which explained the initial assumptions. I reassured him that I understood. Mia's performance was convincing. Once things settled, the police issued Mia a warning, advising her to leave the property and not return without prior arrangement. She stormed off, glaring at me as she walked down the driveway. After dealing with the police, things escalated quickly. About half an hour later, Mia ended up in handcuffs, charged with disorderly conduct, public intoxication, and driving under the influence. When the officers placed her in the back of the squad car, Emma pulled up, asking what had happened. I showed her the video on my phone without saying much. One of the officers handed me the case number and some paperwork. Emma, still shocked, started asking the officer about the charges, but I quietly stepped back inside the house. A few minutes later, she followed and sat down beside me. Emma explained that she had only left the house for 10 minutes to run to the store. When she got back, Mia was no longer in the living room. Emma assumed she had gone to bed after drinking too much wine. We sat there talking for a while longer until Emma asked if she could stay the night. I told her she was always welcome. She mentioned that Mia would have to spend the night in jail. For some reason, they couldn't process her bail until morning. Emma called her parents after I went inside, letting them know what had happened and asking if they could help cover Mia's bail, since she didn't have that kind of money. Later that night, we each grabbed a beer and went to our rooms. By the time I woke up the next morning, Emma was gone. She had left early to meet with her parents. I hadn't heard from Mia, Emma, or their family since, but I imagine the conversation they were having wasn't pleasant. Since that night, I hadn't heard a word from Mia. However, my lawyer informed me that her attorney had reached out, officially representing her in the divorce. Finally, the process could begin. I also texted Jack's ex-fiancée to check in. She updated me, saying she had thrown Jack out of the house. Her father and brother had packed up all his belongings and dropped them off at his place. Apparently, her father and brother were eager to rough him up, but she convinced them to let it go. She told me she just wanted to move on and leave the whole situation behind her. She thanked me for checking in and mentioned that her friends and family had been a solid source of support through it all. That Friday, I left work early, planning to head to my cabin for the weekend. When I got home, Emma was already parked in my driveway. She was there to pick up more of Mia's things and handed me a list of items Mia wanted. I glanced over the list. Everything but one item was already boxed up and stored in the garage. I told Emma I wasn't going to transport or touch any of it. I didn't want to be responsible if Mia tried to claim something was damaged. Instead, I offered to hire a moving company to come and handle it, as I didn't want to deal with it myself. Emma thought that was a great idea and wished me a good trip to the cabin. She loaded Mia's clothes into her car, then paused before leaving and asked if she could join me at the cabin this time. I told her she could, but she should head home first to drop off Mia's things and pack a bag. By the time I swung by the store and loaded up my truck with supplies, Emma had already returned. I locked up the house, and we drove out to the cabin together. The weekend was exactly what I needed. I rediscovered just how much that cabin meant to me. The view, the silence, the sense of total isolation. It was the perfect escape. There were no awkward run-ins with people, just peace. By Monday, I was back to dealing with reality. I called the moving company and scheduled the pickup. By Tuesday, 3 movers showed up with a large truck and began loading everything. I stayed outside, carefully watching the process. I filmed each box as they sealed it and photographed the furniture before it was loaded. The movers were patient and thorough, and I appreciated their professionalism. Once everything was packed, I tipped each worker $50 and thanked them for their time. I sent all the videos and photos directly to my lawyer, covering all my bases. The house felt empty, but oddly clean, without Mia's belongings cluttering the space. When I started the divorce process, my lawyer advised me not to get rid of anything that could be considered shared property, so most of the furniture ended up in storage. Ever since Mia left, I had been sleeping in the guest room. Even if the house ended up staying with me after the divorce, I wasn't planning to live in it. Too many bad memories lingered in those walls. Between wrapping up the divorce, dealing with Mia's antics, and coaching the local high school baseball team, my free time has been practically non-existent. About a month ago, Mia accused me of damaging her belongings during the move. She demanded $1,500, threatening to take me to court if I didn't pay. My lawyer responded by forwarding all the photos and videos of the moving process to her attorney, asking which box supposedly contained the damaged items. He assured me that Mia's baseless accusations would only make her look unstable in front of a judge. Even though it was frustrating to deal with now, he believed it would strengthen our case in the long run. I don't think Mia's lawyer expected me to be so meticulous. Ever since discovering her affair, I have become obsessed with reading horror stories about messy divorces. I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't become one of those stories. I prepared for every possible outcome and every accusation she could throw at me. At this point, I was ready for anything. Mia started calling me every couple of days, but I never answered. If she left a voicemail, I forwarded it directly to my lawyer without listening to it. Each time, he'd laugh and tell me, "You're a dream client. You actually listen. You've gathered more evidence than I ever expected, and I've never had someone so prepared for every twist." Hearing that always made me smile. Knowing I was handling things the right way brought me some relief. About 3 weeks ago, my lawyer told me we had more than enough evidence to bury her case before it even went to court. But instead of dragging things out, we decided to try for a settlement. It would look better to the judge if we attempted to resolve things amicably. We scheduled a meeting for last week at the lawyer's office. Before we walked in, my attorney reminded me not to react to anything Mia said. Everything would be recorded and could potentially be reviewed by the judge. To my surprise, Mia and her lawyer were already there when we arrived. The attorneys exchanged polite greetings while Mia and I sat silently across from each other. Her lawyer kicked things off by asking what we were willing to offer. My lawyer chuckled and laid it out bluntly. With the mountain of evidence we had on her infidelity and erratic behavior, the only thing we were offering was half the proceeds from the sale of the house and half of the joint savings account. It was more than any judge would typically award. He told them, essentially, "You'll leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it." Then, turning directly to Mia, he added, "If you take this to court, I will display every message and force you to read them out loud. I will show every photo, and you will explain in detail what's happening in each one. I will also bring up your false accusations and play the video of the incident at his home. This can either end today, or we can make a spectacle of it in court. Your choice." Mia started crying. Through tears, she turned to me and asked if there was any way to fix things. I told her no. I explained that I had proof she had been cheating even before the wedding. I couldn't verify how long it had been going on, but I suspected it had started long before I discovered it. Nothing she could say or do would erase the betrayal. I told her to sign the papers. The offer was more than generous. I just wanted to put an end to this circus. She sobbed for the next 15 minutes, eventually excusing herself to the bathroom to calm down. When she returned, she was still teary-eyed but signed the documents. Soon after, she left without another word. In about a month, the divorce will be finalized. After that, the only thing left will be to sell the house. I doubt anything else will happen between now and then, but if it does, I'll update you. This is probably the last chapter of this story. Honestly, I'll never understand why someone would marry a person they were already cheating on. I wasn't rich, I wasn't some trophy catch, none of it made sense. Thanks to everyone who followed along. Your support meant more than you know.